Let's get into the conversation right now with Chris Smith, my colleague here at Sky News, and of course 2GB. Lovely to see him as always. And Nicholas Rees, the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne, and also my mate here at Sky News. So, Labor's given up on power prices. What about that? What, we're 2 weeks in, and the Resources Minister says, nothing to see. We can't do anything here, Chris.
Yeah, well, this is what happens when you have a black and white view of where you're getting your power from. The black and white view was no more coal, no more gas. They wanted to follow their mates, the Greens, in saying that. And so all we want to do is build windmills and solar panels and we'll get through. But no one's come up. No one has produced a scientific paper that says that we can have that transition at that particular point in time without the lights going off. And look what's happened. And I've got this sick view of this whole situation. I'd like to see the lights go out. I'd actually like to see now what we're probably facing, which is we either pay skyrocketing prices, the government goes in and bails everyone out by giving out socialist payments to everyone so the rich can pay for their power bills. The place goes to, the industry falls over, manufacturing falls over, so we learn a lesson. It might be great to transition into green power, but you've got to have a plan to be able to practically do that. There's no plan. No one's got the plan. We'll just transition and it'll work out, whether we've got battery power or not. I hate this, but this is what happens because we took the black and white view of it all.
Well, but also, Nicholas, we know what the transition is, and the conversation that I've been having with you on this show for the best part of a decade is about, let's be honest, about the cost of transition. Supply and cost of existing supply is the cost of transition. This is the 10-year bit nobody wanted to talk about that we're starting to live this winter.
Yep, and Paul, you and I have always agreed that gas would be a big part of that transition, and yet here we are. We are the world's biggest exporter of LNG gas, more than the Middle East, more than the USA, more than Canada, and yet over recent weeks we've seen the price of energy quadruple. And it's obvious what's happened here. We're paying the price of 9 years of failure on energy policy in this country. We haven't seen proper price mechanisms put in place. We haven't seen the investment going into renewables that we need. And instead, we've seen our fleet of coal-fired power stations, about 24 of them, they've become run down, they're offline.
Well, why didn't we invest in making sure that they were still working, Nicholas? Why didn't we invest in making sure that they were still working so we can get our baseload power?
That's a very good question, Chris. I mean, we've had 9 years of failed energy policy under the coalition where the investment that needed to be made in our energy system has not occurred. Now, Labor didn't create this problem, but they will also be judged on how they go about fixing it. And I do think they need to look at this energy trigger mechanism and not waiting till January next year, but seeing if they can do something to bring that forward. They have a mechanism like that in Western Australia. They're paying $5 a gigajoule for power there. In the eastern states, we're paying 8 times that. So there are mechanisms out there which have been shown to work in some jurisdictions. I think they should be looking at that at a national level as well.
But also, Nick, the reality of how much money goes into the renewable market, these are now private companies, and I'm very happy to say that anyone who advocated for the mass privatisation of these things, well, look what's happening right now. But it's the state energy authorities, and most states have had 50-50 renewable energy targets in place for much of the past 9 years. They are the ones that are openly supporting more wind farms, more solar. In Victoria, they're closing down things like coal-fired power stations. They've got about 25% of the market, actually 40%, sorry, on some days that are renewable. So the actual levels of government that actually build this stuff have never been standing in the way of it. It's a bit of a convenient fallacy where we've deliberately mucked up, and I think that this starts with Turnbull and goes all the way to today, about trying to pretend the federal government is involved in the energy mix. It is the state governments and the private companies at the state levels that have decided to build or not build.
I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I mean, everybody knows we're transitioning away we're transitioning towards renewables, and the banks have just stopped investing in coal-fired power because they know it doesn't have a long-term future.
That didn't happen last week.
So the power stations have been allowed to run down over a decade, and we haven't had the amount of investment that was needed in new forms of energy taking place.
But the private sector can do that.
As the tide goes out, we're being caught caught with our pants down as a nation and prices are going up like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, but also, what about what I said too about local councils before? There's a local council in Melbourne that turns around and tells a bloke, "Oh, take the solar panels off your heritage home." Now, local council has led the way with the emergency declarations on climate change. Yet again, to my knowledge, in the city of Sydney, you're not allowed to have solar panels on the side of your house that faces the street because of the street appeal. You don't have any of these people saying, "Oh, we're going to shut down the local community-owned golf course and turn it into a solar farm." Instead, we're going to put it all out in Airbnb country and hopefully, bugger the farmers of Ballarat.
You made a really good point in part of that editorial earlier, Paul, about that. Why is it the Bush have to cop the worst end of this particular quotient? Why do they have to carry the responsibility, carry the negative impacts of clearing forest land and putting in wind turbines? I had someone on my show last night who showed me a picture of their national park just outside of Cairns that was smothered by trucks and sand and wrecked so they could make way for wind turbines. Well, where are the local councils saying, hang on a minute, we're cutting our nose off to spite our face here. This isn't what we were meant to do.
Yeah, so my point, Nicholas, is isn't it part of your responsibility at, say, Melbourne City Council to say of the thousands of parkland square kilometres that we own, we have to turn some of that into space for energy creation, not just saying we have to change our usage. You have the capacity, if you want to put 3 wind farms in the middle of a current footy field, put a battery underneath it and plug that into the local grid. But no one's suggesting that at local council level.
Well, I contend the City of Melbourne, we're looking for every opportunity we can to put more renewables in and create a battery network that can help power the city using renewable power. So we're looking for every space available, Paul, to put new renewable
but imagine the
generation
numbers you would get if
in.
you
We've had
wanted to
some great
put
success
solar
on that
farms on a
front.
footy over.
Also, I mean, another really great thing we did at the City of Melbourne was we created a renewable energy buying pool where a number of big companies, big consumers of power in the city, we all came together. We went out to the market as a collective and we ended up building a new wind farm in Western Victoria that's now selling renewables to the city. It was a fantastic win-win for regional Victoria and for Melbourne and for the planet because it's helping us transition to renewables, getting the job done.
But we're not transitioning and keeping baseload power on tap. The supply is too short, which is why the demand is too big, which is why we're going to pay through the nose with our power prices. Look at South Australia. They took the running on this. They haven't since 2016 produced any power out of a coal-fired power station. They've got 1/5 of their power being supplied by diesel generators. Like, it's one thing to have the virtuous signalling of green renewables. I get it. Go and transition as hard as you possibly can. Find your batteries and your technology. But you've got to put money into gas and coal because that keeps the lights on.
Well, also, perfect example about just a little sleight of hand that you might see in the media here, right? This was one of the websites that we pay for as taxpayers. Their headline today said, "Why Canberrans' electricity bills are falling while other Australian power costs are soaring." Now, what's interesting here is that, of course, there is a 100% renewable energy policy right now in the ACT. But here's the giant asterisk. They actually don't produce all of the energy they use in the ACT. They have giant extension cords into New South Wales. What does South Australia do? They have extension cords into New South Wales.
Yeah.
What does South Australia do? They have an extension cord into Victoria. What is going to happen when it comes to hydro? An extension cord is going to go into Victoria. So my thing here, Nicholas, is that when sort of, look at the ACT, look at Canberra. Well, firstly, their power bills went up by 20% last year. So coming down from going up is not exactly a giant saving. But it is disingenuous to pretend that all of the ACT is 100% energy self-sufficient. It is not.
No, you're right. They get about 80% of their power from renewables. 20% of it comes from non-renewable sources. That's still a pretty good track record here in Australia. I still think it's a target which other states should be looking to emulate. And in terms of the prices they pay, they've been about the same as the rest of Australia for the last 3 or 4 years. But now, with gas prices soaring, the wisdom of that investment that the ACT has made is coming home for their benefit. So,
But
you know,
also has
average
the
prices in
land mass of a
ACT about
postage
$92. Rest of Australia, about $450.
But there's also
they're
less
paying
than 500,000
4 times
people
less
in
than we
Canberra.
are in Sydney and Melbourne,
But-
because of the foresight that they have shown by making that transition to renewables, getting the job done. That's what.
Okay, it's a very different topography, very different population though, Nicholas.
No, but also, Nicholas, this is the bit where the argument can't have it both ways. So all of that happened despite the fact that it was a territory that could be overruled by an evil federal Liberal government. But they made that transition anyway. So which is it? They made the transition on their own, or we're suffering because the federal government held us back?
So hang on, you're critical of their policy because they've got interconnectors.
No, I'm saying if the
outside
argument is we are
ACT,
where we are now because the evil government held us back for 9 years, but the ACT's awesome because despite the evil government, they were able to go off and make decisions of their own. That's the point, which is that it is inconsistent what the argument is being put. I'm all up for the necessary changes.
The problem with the coalition government is that they fumbled it both ways. On the one hand, they weren't investing in renewables and that transition because of some sort of culture war that they were running on that front. At the same time, they allowed Australia's fleet of 24 coal-fired power stations to run down, to be degraded. They turned into old clunkers, didn't refurb them when they needed to be.
So now we didn't spend enough money upgrading them, Chris?
So we ended up with coal-fired power that doesn't work anymore, or is inefficient, and we didn't make the investment in renewables, which we should have. And you see what happens in the ACT, where they did make those sort of investments, encourage those sort of policies. Now they're paying power prices that are 4 times less than we're paying in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne.
But Chris, I remember a conversation of the past 9 years, which is the federal government wants to help prop up coal-fired power stations, but you can't do that. They're not competitive. You won't get money. So which is it?
Yeah,
right?
we can't have it both ways. And the whole thing about the Canberra analogy is the fact that there's less than 500,000 people there. Yeah. The trajectory for population is almost flat.
More people live in Nick's electorate.
Correct. And they're surrounded by bushland where you can put these wind turbines and get access without all the transmission lines that you'd have to put in. It's not a comparable.
Lads, a good chat. I look forward to another one next week. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it.